Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for a conversation on advocacy and disabilities at Boston University School of Theology. This Zoom webinar is primarily intended for School of Theology students, staff, faculty, and alums. The School of Theology has a long tradition of activism, and we want to feature the trajectories of persons who have been involved in the task of advocacy in church, higher education, and the community at large. Today we have three panelists. The first panelist is Cara Jackman. Cara is an archivist at Boston University by day and a freelance writer by night. She is the Marketing and Communications Coordinator for Children's Craniofacial Association. She spent 7 years on the board of directors on the Foundation for Faces of Children located in Boston. She was born with bilateral cleft lip and palate and hopes to inspire others with facial differences and disabilities through her words and action. Cara is also the chairperson of Staff and Faculty Extend Boston University Disability Supports. Our second panelist is Dr. Megan Sullivan. Dr. Sullivan is Associate Professor of Rhetoric at the College of General Studies. She just completed a 7-year term as Associate Dean for Faculty Research and Development and Director of the Center for Interdisciplinary Teaching and Learning. She writes about Irish literature and film, particularly by women, as well as about children of incarcerated parents in the United States. She's currently writing about the 20th century fiction and nonfiction writer, Maeve Brennan. Sullivan is committed to encouraging universities and colleges to teach more about disability across the disciplines and to hire faculty and staff with disabilities. Our third panelist is Dr. Diana Ventura. Dr. Ventura holds a PhD in Practical Theology and Spirituality Studies from Boston University School of Theology, where she serves as an adjunct faculty member. Her teaching and research explores a wide range of topics, including disability studies, chronic disease, aging, qualitative research methods, Christian spirituality, and mysticism. She's the author of Our Fractured Wholeness, Making the Courageous Journey from Brokenness to Love. Dr. Ventura also is Chief Data Administrator for the Center for Biostatistics in AIDS Research. She plays a critical role managing data quality for clinical research trials focused on infectious disease such as HIV, tuberculosis, and COVID-19, while fostering collaboration from diverse groups across multiple research networks. She's an ethical reviewer for New England Institutional Review Board. Thank you to our panelists, and we are going to proceed by alphabetical order, and we are going to start with Cara Jackman. Thank you, Cara.
Thank you, Ravi, and I'd like to thank the School of Theology for this opportunity. I'd like to thank Boston University and my distinguished panelists, Dr. Diana Ventura and Dr. Megan Sullivan. Again, I find myself surrounded by doctors, as I have been my whole life, so no surprises. Yeah, so here I am surrounded by doctors yet again. I was born this way. I was born to share my story with you. I was born to be an advocate. I was born to make lives easier for those of us that struggle daily in disabled bodies. I don't want anyone to feel alone. My name is Cara. My story is my superpower. Born with bilateral cleft lip and palate on July 15th, 1979. I'm just gonna show these slides, sorry guys. I found myself in my first year of life enduring 5 surgeries to repair it and to keep my ears, nose, and throat clear. I was fed by dropper and tubes with formula, not at my mother's breast. I would go on to have another 15 to 20 more procedures through present day. My body continues to erode from the numerous surgeries and other medical interventions necessary to keep me alive and well. I have difficulty hearing, tinnitus, extensive dental prosthetics, mental health issues galore, stomach trouble, and neck and chronic body pain that I must manage with on a daily basis. I'm a veritable one-woman band of disability, yet for many years I denied that identity. It took until age 15 to realize my story was my strength, when I wrote an essay for our local craniofacial community's nonprofit, the Foundation for Faces of Children. I was honest in it. I wrote about beauty not being skin deep, but something we hold in our hearts and in our minds. In writing, I could share and be open. In person, it took a lot longer or did not happen at all. The reasons are many and varied. Number one, I'm a child of the 80s. We just wanted to blend in. If you were weird, different, or whined about your troubles, that was just not okay. And number two, I pushed stuff under the rug because to relive the trauma of the surgeries, medical appointments, bullying at school, and questions about what was wrong with my lip and why I sounded funny was just too much. Emotions were not something we discussed at home, and I had a lot of them and felt them very intensely. So I always turned to my journals, to the written word, to process everything. And while the writing helped, I didn't take these words into my heart, something that wouldn't happen until a few years ago. Back then, I knew there had to be more that I could do. There had to be more, right? So I attended some Foundation for Faces of Children nonprofit events with my family while in high school, and went to annual walks, raised money, but it just wasn't enough for me. I wrote some more, got published a bit more. Then in 2006, I was asked to join the board of directors of the Foundation for Faces of Children. There, I was able to enhance our programs for kids so that kids like me could see that there are other people that lived with the same conditions they did. Growing up, I was the only one I knew with clefting or any facial difference other than the families in the hospital waiting rooms. Teens and young adults have an especially tough time as it is, so, and even more so when they have facial differences. So from 2008 to 2009, I worked tirelessly to create a teen and young adult symposium, the first ever, I believe, in the country to do such work for that population. The half-day symposium, or forum as we called it, the teen forum, brought together major medical professionals in Boston from the World Health Organization and their patients too, that they treated. It was such a smashing success that I think I got some national attention in the craniofacial world. This fame has not been confirmed or denied by my current employees. Just a year later, in 2010, Children's Craniofacial Association asked me to come to their Boston annual retreat and educational symposium. They wanted a session on mental health and teens and young adults, and being a teen with a facial difference, and I was happy to help them. At the Boston Annual Retreat and Educational Symposium, all those famous Boston Children's Hospital doctors, my doctors, were on the bill. And then little old me. I would present again at CCA's 2013 Annual Retreat in Orlando, Florida. There I met the woman who would later become my boss. Her name is Erica Klauber. She would become my boss in 2016. And she asked me to write for the blog for CCA, and then eventually would be offered the marketing communications coordinator position. All the while I hosted sporting events for the Foundation for Faces of Children after having stepped down from the board. It is amazing to see kids' faces, to see the way they come alive at a minor league baseball game or a college hockey game, to see another person that looks like them. This was an experience that I never had, and it is a gift that both organizations give to their families as a service and through our programming. Everyone from the kids to the families just get it. I think the students, faculty, and staff at the School of Theology feel the same way about me. They just look at me and they know, I get it. And many have gravitated toward me over the years of service to the school. I help students at STH, master's doctoral students, and even undergrads navigate the UU system to get their needs met and for them to be successful. It was just what I did. People come to me with gripes and complaints, and I help fix them. Fast forward to 2018, another light bulb year. One of the greatest classes to grace the halls of this institution descended upon this school. There was something about them. Instantly, I knew them, I felt them, I believed in them. I think this is what love at first sight must feel like. I'll never know, but I have to guess. They were raw, honest, kind, queer, diverse, Black, brown, trans, disabled, humans, people, my kind of people. They embraced who they were in a way I never could when I was in my 20s and my 30s. They were vulnerable and they wanted to find the closest rooftop and scream from the top of their lungs who they were and what they stood for. This was different. These humans came into my life at just the right time, and when that happens, it is truly magical. I realized I needed to share my story with them and with Boston University. They would be my teachers. They would make me comfortable enough to share, to profess, and to confess my truth at Boston University too. I tried to keep my advocacy work separate from my work life. These students would help me become my whole self at work for the first time ever. All of this occurred as my hearing worsened and worsened, requiring hearing aids in both ears. And that happened in 2019. I finally got those. Our School of Theology students made me feel comfortable during this very crucial transition in my own medical journey. Those special students were my friends in the Cross Disability Club. The Cross Disability Club was founded in my archives reading room after I hosted a Hebrew Bible study session in early 2018 fall semester. Of all the rooms and all the places, you chose mine, or I chose you for mine because the library conference room was occupied. Shortly after, we had meetings, events, and more. The students drove everything. I just oriented them to all things BU, STH, logistics. I was good at that. We ran events, worship services, so many things. Even invited others from other schools and went to some of their events at their schools and colleges too. I was meeting new people and making connections. Some of them thought I had something going, something promising in the work I was doing with these students. At the beginning of the next calendar year, in 2019, I was asked by one of these new friends, these new colleagues, to submit a letter of intent for the newly created Faculty and Staff Community Networks, an initiative started by the Provost's Office of Diversity and Inclusion. I was quickly accepted as chair, and we began our work shortly before the COVID-19 pandemic began. Our goal is to empower faculty and staff to feel safe and as whole as I do here on campus, and in turn to make things more accessible to the students too. A trickle-down effect, but only in the best possible way. Maybe BU would be more welcoming, a more welcoming place for individuals with disabilities that worked here. I had my troubles with accommodations, Family Medical Leave Act, being misunderstood, and other issues around my own employment, which I overcame. But now I have the opportunity to help others and avoid these potential pitfalls, and for them to feel at home at BU too. In doing this work, I realized that it is not important to disclose your disability. I don't care about that. How you want to identify yourself is up to you. I know I feel more confident now than I have ever saying I am disabled because of the friends I have in this community, in the Cross Disability Club, and in the membership of Safe Buds, the name we gave our faculty and staff community network. If you're not ready to disclose, that is okay. Come to our events anyway. Everyone needs a leg up or a lift up to be successful. My parents were always there for me and still are, but not everyone has that kind of support system. To be heard, to be understood, to be seen is everything. So please, I invite you to come join us or to sit down with me sometime and have a conversation about how we can make BU your home too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cara. And our next a panelist is Dr. Megan Sullivan. Dr. Sullivan?
Sorry. Okay, can everybody see my screen? I'm sorry, I thought I had that up.
Yes, we can.
Okay, I would like to thank the School of Theology for inviting me. I'd like to thank Roddy for his amazing work in DE&I, and I'd like to thank my fellow panelists. Just in the last year, I've gotten to know Cara, and I've been so impressed by her intelligence and energy. I look forward to working with her more in the future. Today, I'm going to talk about one advocate perspective. I'm going to talk a little bit about my advocacy at BU, mostly at BU, and hope that it resonates with some of you and the work that you either do now or that you want to do. So I'm going to begin with the personal. This is a picture of me as a young child. I have no idea how old I was there. I don't identify, although maybe I will after this, I don't know. I don't identify as a person with disability, but I did have medical issues as a child. As you can see there, I have glasses. I started wearing glasses at 9 months old, I had a slight hearing impairment, and then I had other surgery throughout my adolescent and high school years. What I really took away from that was that we all inhabit very different physical bodies. And I took away a real appreciation for that, as well as an appreciation that that I would later learn or later come to understand more a little bit better, is that disability is the only minority group you can join at any time. And if we live long enough, we will all become disabled. So I have other personal connections to disability. On the right-hand side, you see the woman at the top is my sister, my eldest sister, Maura. When she was 30, Maura was diagnosed with NF2, neurofibromatosis type 2, which meant for her that she had bilateral tumors on her acoustic nerves. So they have to be radiated, they have to be excised and then radiated. And as a result, she became totally deaf, blind in one eye, and she uses a walker. She retired early from her career, and she lives a very full life right now. One of the things she loves to do is to paint, and you see her there with some of her paintings. She first started painting mostly pet portraits for family and friends, and then people started to ask if they could pay her to do it. She didn't want to accept money, so she donates 100% of anything she received to Parkinson's research, in part because our mother lived a very full life with Parkinson's for over a decade. On the screen on the left, you see a picture, it's about 4 or 5 years old, of myself and my husband. My husband was born with a degenerative eye condition as well as a hearing loss. And so what you see there is him with his first guide dog, and I am holding on to his, not his first, his current guide dog, and I'm holding on to his retired guide dog. In print, our picture is superimposed over a card, the print of which reads, "I love you," and the braille of which reads, "I love you." This was an example of advocacy. In January of this year, BU Today sent out a call for Valentine's Day love letters. And of course, I wanted to give a shout out to my husband, but actually more importantly than that, I wanted BU I wanted that feature to represent people with disabilities in it. So I specifically chose this picture and this card to send. I want to talk a little bit from the personal to the early vocational. When I was a young girl, I volunteered at Easter Seals, in part because although I wouldn't know it at the time, I really appreciated their mission, and in part because they were just 2 blocks away from my house. I could walk to them. I enjoyed it so much that in high school, I worked after school at Easter Seals. I worked with young children. Easter Seal mission is to enable infant children and adults with disabilities to achieve their maximum independence and to provide support for the families who love and care for them. Again, I couldn't have articulated that mission at the time, but I think I readily connected with it in their quest to make all children independent and live purposeful lives. After college, I worked for 3 years at an independent living center, and despite what the name would suggest, it's not a residential center. Independent living centers are really centers mostly run by people with disabilities and advocating for the full inclusion of people with disabilities into all aspects of life. My job was to help people with disabilities get into already existing educational programs, so we weren't creating separate programs. The independent living center model comes out of the deinstitutionalization in the United States in the 50s and 60s, and then the disability rights model in the 60s and 70s. This model understands disability as a construct of society. In this model, the problem lies in the environment, not the individual. Though many people have physical, intellectual, and mental attributes that deviate from the so-called norm, disability is manifested in society through purposefully created and maintained physical, programmatic, and attitudinal barriers. Of course, people with disabilities have disabilities, but the problem lies more with our society's inability to make things fully accessible or acceptable. 3 years after working at the Independent Living Center, I went to graduate school. In my first year as a teaching assistant, I had a student in my class who had a letter of accommodation, and I didn't know anything about accommodation issues then. So I went to the Disability Resource Center. They told me that I didn't have to do anything different for the student. I just had to understand what her accommodations were. They also said that no other instructor had ever been to them to ask how they could help a student, which I thought was interesting. I would become, for the next few years, I would focus more on accommodation and then later I would morph more into welcoming students with disabilities rather than simply accommodating them. And I can talk more about that. So I'll merge personal and early vocational at BU. In 1996, I graduated with my PhD and I was hired as an assistant professor of rhetoric at CGS. I was happy to land at CGS for many reasons, some of which were that I had always believed in the importance of students' first 2 years of college. I knew that set the path for academic success for them, and that CGS's focus. I believed in interdisciplinary instruction and cohort learning, and those are also hallmarks of the CGS program. Like all colleges and schools at BU, there were students with disabilities at CGS, and I was able to advocate for them. Again, mostly they took the road of accommodating them and being very aware of their needs, but it would also more into welcoming them and into inclusive pedagogy. In 2000, I started the tenure process, and for those of you who know the process, it can be fraught, and I knew I needed an outlet outside of the academy, so I took a part-time job as a literacy consultant for the Boston Public Schools. And because my job was to teach K through 12 instructors how to teach literature and writing more robustly, because I was at BU, I was assigned to a school that's on St. Mary's Street, and that's called the McKinley Middle School. I would later work with McKinley teachers from K through 12, but McKinley is a school for students with high behavioral, it's a Boston Public School for students with high behavioral needs, and many students have emotional and psychological disabilities, and that was great for me because I learned things I hadn't known before. From then, after I received tenure up until 2013, I tried to the extent that I could to seek out committee assignments that would let me advocate for disability rights. This wasn't always possible because there weren't a lot of committees established to work with people with disabilities. There were very few, but I was able to bring my sort of advocacy angle. And then from 2014 to 2020, when I became an associate dean, I had access to different kinds of audiences, so I was able to take these opportunities to advocate differently. So I'm briefly going to show you in the last few minutes how I advocated in particular so that it might resonate with you. I'll start at the department level. Often on department meetings, faculty talk about what's worked in the classroom for them or what hasn't worked. So I would use the opportunity, for example, when people were talking about creating more robust group work or collaboration in the classroom, I was able to talk about inclusive pedagogy in terms of recognizing how diverse students might feel like in group works, and then talking about students with disabilities in group work. When we talked about classroom practices or a unit that we added, curriculum, I talked about how I had begun to incorporate writing by and about people with disabilities in my classrooms, and thereby I felt like that was welcoming students with disabilities more, teaching all students more, and then allowing students to work on projects like architectural access, etc. At the faculty meeting level, as many of you know, faculty and staff are often asked to present on pedagogical advising or other interventions. I would take this opportunity to volunteer to present on best practices in accommodating students, and then I would sort of work up to discussions of universal design, which we can talk about later. For about 10 years, I was in the Multicultural Admissions Advisory Committee, and our goal was to help brainstorm about how BU could recruit a more diverse student body. I would do that, and I worked hard at that, and then I would also ask about the university and how it considers students with disabilities. Finally, in terms of marketing, etc., I mentioned the BU Today, how I sort of snuck in a little advocacy there. I knew that BU Today was always looking for contributions to their point of view or their op-ed column. So one year during Disability Awareness Month, I picked an essay on how universities could be more welcoming to students with disabilities. Again, at the associate dean role, I had other kinds of opportunities. So for example, I volunteered to be part of the search for DE&I, Director Crystal Williams. In that process, you're allowed to provide feedback and ask questions. So I provide feedback on how we should have somebody in that position who understood disability. That's worked out really well. As an associate dean, you're on the Faculty Affairs Committee, which is basically a committee of associate deans talking about how they can recruit, retain, and develop faculty. So I volunteered to give a workshop on recruiting faculty and staff with disabilities. Same, I was put on I was the diversity person in my college, so I was put on a committee where I met Roddy and others who were disability chairs in their schools. And so again, I offered to present on recruiting and retraining faculty and staff with disabilities. And people like Roddy asked me to then speak at his college or to all HR professionals, etc. Finally, as a director of the Center for Interdisciplinary Teaching and Learning at CGS, one of my roles was to edit an online peer-reviewed journal twice a year, to put out essentially a journal issue twice a year, a peer-reviewed journal issue. And I decided when I got in that job that a certain percentage of those those essays or articles I accepted would be by or about peak disabilities in higher education. Along the way, even though it wasn't my field, my primary field, I was able to publish mostly about teaching with respect to disability and to speak on the topic. And I'll leave you with the last link there. Next fall, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is going to be focusing in the Learn More series on disability. This year, they focused on social class. Last year, they focused on race. So they asked me to give them some speaker names. I did, as well as I also connected them with Cara, and she gave them great names. And then I'm going to submit a proposal to do a kind of breakout session after that. So again, these are ways small ways in which I've been able to advocate in whatever role I've had. And I hope it resonates with you, and I look forward to the question and answer period.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sullivan. And now our next panelist is Dr. Diana Ventura. Dr. Ventura.
Yes, thank you. It's an honor to be here today and to be among these panelists who have presented in such a remarkable way. My experience with disability is lifelong. I've had cerebral palsy, which when I was born, my mother had trouble carrying me to term. So what happened was I was premature, and that made it so I had a lack of oxygen in my brain. So that now when my body sends the messages down to my lower extremities, they get confused. I'm completely off balance. I'm awkward when I walk. And so because of that, when it happened, I'm not that young. It was in the 60s when deinstitutionalization hadn't quite taken hold. So the doctors said to my parents, just put her away, throw her away in an institution. She's not going to amount to anything. She's not going to have a life worth living. They made all kinds of predictions about my life without really having all of the information. And so my parents did not listen to the cultural narrative of the day that said that they should just throw me away. What the doctors did not know is that my grandmother had a son who had cerebral palsy. And in the 1930s, she kept him at home and didn't throw him away in an institution. So there was no way that I was going to be thrown away. But then as my life proceeded, and it came time for me to go to school, there were no laws then that said people with disabilities needed to be integrated into regular classrooms. So I was sent to the Industrial School for Crippled Children in Boston. And there, for the first few years of my educational life, I didn't learn very much. And it was very lucky that I lived in Massachusetts, because right after that, they passed Chapter 766, which was the precursor to the Public Law 94142, which is the public law that is known now as IDEA, which is the special education law. So I was mainstreamed into the 3rd grade, and I could barely read and write. And the teachers didn't really care that I could barely read and write. And my classmates were my teachers. And then I proceeded on to high school. And I received a letter from the Social Security office that said, fully disabled, does not have to work. Imagine, use your imagination. Think for a minute what it would be like not to work, ever. 15% of people with disabilities are employed in this country right now. That's too low. So I didn't listen to any of that, nor did my parents, nor did my friends, nor did my family. They didn't let me listen to the narrative of ableism. They believed in me and believed in who I was. So then I decided to have a better life, a more significant life. And I went off to college, and I struggled, but I had supporters in my college experience that wouldn't let me quit. And then I decided that I wanted to go to graduate school. And all along the way, there were people that said, she'll never do it. She can't do it. Again, they were listening to the narrative of ableism. But there were other people in my life that didn't listen to that narrative. And they said, we know you can do it, Diana. And I didn't listen to it either. And so I fought my way through graduate school. And then I decided that I wanted to go to get my PhD. And I was a student here at BU. And here at BU, I was supported by the Center for Practical Theology and all of the faculty and staff here, including Cara helping me with some manuscript stuff that I needed when I was writing my PhD. And so the way that I think that it works, ableism, in terms of a theological, the way that it works, I think that it's like Cohn's existential absurdity. Cohn writes in his book, and this is in Black Theology and Black Power, he writes in that book that when the person of color meets the white supremacist structure, that they get an almighty no, and they're treated like a thing. Well, people with disabilities are treated like things still in our culture. And they're treated as if they don't really have ability. And the key to the whole thing is to not really listen to that narrative, to listen to another narrative. And the challenge of the whole thing is, though, is when you have a disability and the culture around you is saying that you can't think, you can't move, you're not good enough, you'll never amount to anything. There's all kinds of people that allow all of those things to get integrated into themselves. And for me, for a very long time, I was one of those people. I hated myself because I was disabled in the way that I move. I hated it in my body. My cerebral palsy would make it so I would fall often. And when I would be on the ground, I would yell out to God and I would say, why are you making me live this way? And I would be angry and upset and ashamed of my own self. But here's where it gets really amazing, that it's through theological education that I have changed and I gained a different perspective. And here's where we have the mystical and the prophetic, in that in the mystical and in studying spirituality, I encountered Julian of Norwich. And Julian of Norwich says something amazing in her revelations. And that is that God is with us in our humblest of needs. Right there in our humblest of needs. So when I would fall, something different would happen within me. I would be on the ground instead of saying, God, why are you making me live this way? It's my God. My God is right here with me when the ground is hard and I am all dirty. And she also says that right there in the humblest of needs, that's the highest form of prayer. This is really amazing. And so this fall after fall, day after day, starts to seep into who I am as a human being. I get to see myself differently. And that's amazing. But I not only studied Julian of Norwich, I studied Theresa of Avila. Now, Theresa, I'm no saint. I'll never claim to be a saint. But Theresa of Avila, she had a great, intense intimacy with God. And this intimacy with God made it so she started to see herself differently in the world. And then she has a revelation that women are not inferior. And in the 16th century Spain, women were inferior. That was the narrative. But she could see it differently because she had this relationship with God. And then because she has this relationship with God, then all of that narrative about women being inferior kind of becomes impenetrable to her. And she can feel okay with herself, even though out there in the structures of her society, there's all of this negativity. And so with me, what happened when I started to get the sense of God being with me in my body, and that my body was actually good the way that it is, then I could put within myself and not really listen as intensely to the ableism that was all around me, telling me all kinds of things about myself that aren't true. And then it's within that, then I finally, because I've gone through Boston University School of Theology, I have been able to then gain and have my voice. Now, you might be wondering, how do I really see advocacy working in everyday life? Well, here's how I think it works. And here's what happens. Mary McClintock Fulkerson talks in her book, Places of Redemption. She says in that book that she talks about an encounter she had with a man with cerebral palsy. And she talks about all this anxiety about seeing this man in the chair. He's all crumpled up with cerebral palsy in this wheelchair, and she gets all kind of freaked out by it. But she names it. She names it that we have visceral reactions to people with disabilities. And I'm here to tell you that it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to have anxiety. But we don't stop there. You have that anxiety, you have that fear, but then there's something else that you need to do. And now I'm taking a page out of Dorothy Day's playbook. Dorothy Day tells us to see the humanity of everyone and the good of everyone. Now, she's Catholic, so she says that we should see Christ in everyone. But my call in a pluralistic culture is to see the humanity of the sacred humanity of everyone. And beyond that, when we're in this place where we might have fear and anxiety over people, I find that John of the Cross and something that he said is very significant and helpful as well. And that is, where there is no love, put love, and you will draw out love. Now, the reason why I'm telling you all of this is because I believe that it's when we become comfortable with ourselves and our own bodies that then we can start to have interactions with people with disabilities. The most common complaint among people with disabilities is social isolation. And that's because people don't try to initiate conversations with people with disabilities because of this fear thing. And so that's where the power is, in the interactions that we have one to another, and not really listening to that initial fear, but initiating a conversation and breaking the silence about disability. That is really how I think ableism will start to break down and change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all three of you for your wonderful and impactful presentations. This is exactly what we intended. We wanted to hear about your journey to becoming advocates. And we do have some questions on the chat. I have a few questions of my own. And I would like to start by talking a little bit about spirituality. I teach courses on spirituality, and I have done research on spirituality, and we heard Diana, if I may call you by your first name, talk about spirituality, and that was more explicit, but I couldn't avoid hearing a lot of themes related to spirituality in all three presentations. So one of the things that I talk about in my classes is the spirituality of activism. And in the way that you have described your advocacy, I kind of recognize that each one of you has a kind of spirituality of activism that has led you in this path. And of course, the theme of love is important, but it's also that theme of an internalized sense of shame that that both of you, Diana and Cara, articulated. So what do you think about that in your journey? Do you think that spirituality was important for you? Did you find love and the power to love in the things that you were doing? Does that make sense? Cara, I see you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's a tough one for me. Diana, you made me cry. And of course I ran out of tissues today. So, yay. Yeah, so spirituality and God and religion are tough subjects for me, because, and it was when Diana was talking about that, like at 3 years old, at 4 years old, like I'm questioning God. I'm like, why is this happening? Why do I have to have another surgery? Why do I have to go to this doctor's appointment? Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do that? I've had it, I'm done. Like, yes, I'll go to church, Mom. Yes, we'll be Catholic. And yes, I'll do whatever you say, Mom and Dad. But I'm sorry, I just can't buy this. And it wasn't until, it wasn't until college that the Jesuits kind of lifted me up at Holy Cross. And then it wasn't until I started doing the work of helping other people that I felt a sense of like, oh, this is that spirituality. Like, this is that thing I'm looking for, this reason for being, this purpose. I still don't really have it. I don't have like the Christian thing. And yet people tell me I'm Christian all the time. Oh, you're such a good, Christian. And I'm like, well, no, I'm just, I try to be as good a person as I can. And I know that my service to other people and my ability to help lift them up, feel seen and loved, that's it. Like, that's it for me. That's a spiritual practice.
Right, and thank you, Cara, for calling our attention to that. Like, it is important that we are able to talk about spirituality without having to talk about God. And then how, in your case, you're just stating it, that in your service, you found something about a sense of purpose. Very good. And who else? Megan or Diana? And I apologize for calling all of you by your first name. I hope that you don't mind.
Please, I've been calling you the same. I would say I have, I don't know, I would say that I was raised more sort of in the social justice milieu of activism. Diana mentioned Dorothy Day. And my mother was sort of somewhat of a follower of Dorothy Day. So I think I kind of internalized some of that. I would say my spiritual practice of activism is definitely rooted in kind of social justice activism. But good question.
Thank you. Diana?
Well, I would say that my life has just been marked by trying to figure out the relationship between my body and how I felt in terms of my own self-hatred and God's relationship to that. And when I say that my theological work has transformed my life, it didn't, I just kind of did this theological lightning round, right? And it seems like it came like in a flash, but it wasn't a flash. My struggle was a lot like Cara's, like even in theological education, like I would hear sermons about healings and all of this stuff, and I would be like, oh my God, why am I here? Like, I'm in the most hostile environment that I possibly could be in. And then if you look at like how the scriptures in some denominations are bended and twisted, and the church is very ableistic, and it hasn't quite figured out, I think, on how to be welcoming to people with disabilities. And this is one of the things that we work on in our disability and theology workshop, and what we try to do in the class that we have dealing with disability and theology. We try to pull all of these different elements of ableism that are very active in our church and analyze them. And the hope is that we end up as a class with better responses to the church and the academy. by the time we finish, but it's a process. And one of the challenges about teaching this class is that I tell it at the very beginning. I say, don't, all of a sudden it's going to hit you one day. You ain't going to be feeling that good because it's all going to be working up inside of you. And my hope is that by the end of the class, people have at least started to come out the other side.
Very good. And now there are some questions on the chat, and I would like to go over them. So, for example, Dr. Thomas Underwood actually has a question for each one of you. The first one that I have is for Cara, and the question is, and I'm paraphrasing, how can allies of disabled people at BU help advocate for disabled faculty and staff?
So I first want to say thank you, Thomas. He is, Dr. Underwood is my vice chair in Safe Buds, and we so appreciate his service, and I'm so appreciative of him being here today to ask this question and to be so supportive in the chat and the Q&A. So yeah, how can people be more friendly and supportive of their disabled colleagues here at BU? And first of all, I really think it's important that we understand the history of the school and disabilities, and then make sure that we're aware of the context in which we operate. And that's something that we still need to do some improvement on. I mean, we have all kinds of areas that we need to improve on, and so it's not anything bad, it's just something that we need to think about. And then from there, I really do think empathy, storytelling, and really letting people know that you're open-minded, kind, and willing to help them with whatever it is that they're dealing with, and providing them with the resources that we have available now. Safe Buds have a Facebook page, an Instagram, we have a website, and we have a diversity and equity and inclusion office that I feel like is second to none right now, with such great people. So it's just reaching out. We're really gonna push hard on that, on the theme for the Learn More series next academic year, and I'm looking forward to that, and I hope that will also provide some fruitful information. But please be kind. Please don't, maybe don't ask people what is wrong with them, but maybe be gentle with them, and be open-minded, and look for the resources that they may need, rather than be punishing or be afraid. As Diana so well put out, that anxiety then leads to a freeze phase, right? And then we don't act, or we run away, or we hide, or whatever it is. So please, just kind of get yourself out of that anxious moment, and think about what you would need in that moment. If you were sick with the flu, or if you couldn't see or couldn't hear, or were having kind of an emotional kind of storm in your brain, think about empathy, storytelling, vulnerability, love.
Thank you, Cara. And then Dr. Thomas Underwood also has a question for Megan. And again, I'm paraphrasing. How can BU faculty advocate for disabled students during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I also thank Tom Underwood for his questions. I know one thing he does in his classes is to do a kind of check-in with students to see how they're feeling and see how they're doing. And I think that's a great practice. BU, as some of you may know, BU over the last several years has had the largest jump in students with hidden disabilities, whether those are mental illness, psychological disabilities, or physical disabilities like Crohn's disease, things like that. And it strikes me that all of those disabilities could be exacerbated during the pandemic. Everybody has a little more anxiety during the pandemic. Imagine if you're someone who's struggling with anxiety, or imagine someone, you have Crohn's disease and you stress is a flare-up for you. How much more stressed are you going to be right now? So I think the key is to just allow students to let you know how they're doing, let you know what they need, and then to think about different ways they might be affected. It was interesting to me that I recently heard a group of blind people talking about, and they had, as most of you know, blindness doesn't mean total darkness for everybody. People have various levels of blindness or vision impairment. And people were talking about how masks were really hindering what little eyesight they have left. And so that they were feeling very much more vulnerable walking around, and that so that's just a little example of something you might not see. I feel like some students with disabilities might be having a harder time right now than they've had before. I don't want to assume all of them have, but some of them have. Some of them might have. I can imagine students who use computer augmented equipment. It might be hard now when they're in a home where they don't have ready access to that. So I think the best thing is to just check in and ask students what they need. But it's a great question.
Thank you very much. Then Dr. Thomas Underwood also has a question for Diana, and I share the premise of this question with him. He mentions that he was moved by your the telling of your story, and he asks, have you written a memoir? Is this something that is in your agenda? I also share that question.
That's my book, Fraction Wholeness, is a spiritual autobiography.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually was my senior ministry project. So for my senior ministry project, what I did was I interviewed people with disabilities, and because I was trying to always try to figure out this relationship between disability and theology. And so what I did for that book was I used my own experience and explored it theologically. So there's some theology in it, and then there's some really, I pulled out all of my best kind of stories are in it. So the one thing that I think about that is that Thomas Merton wrote his memoir about halfway through his life. And I wrote that when I was about 40. So I'm hoping that I can squeak out a few more years after 80. I can buck that trend.
Very good. Thank you. Another question that is on the chat comes from Dr. Dana Robert. And so there are two parts. It's like the question is like two sides of the same coin. It has to do with talking about disability. For instance, for faculty in the classroom, sometimes students need the accommodations, right? And sometimes they want to talk about their disabilities or their needs for accommodations, and sometimes they don't want to. So how can faculty work with the students? The other side of the coin is, what about faculty who come to the classroom with disabilities? How can they talk about that in the classroom? And I think this aspect of communicating and opening up is something that Cara and Diana highlighted. You highlighted this in your presentations. So anyone who would like to address this?
Yeah, it's really hard to open up about these things. It took me a very long time. I wanted to pretend that I'm fine and I'm able-bodied, and even when I interviewed here, like, it was kind of funny because I can't remember if I had my teeth in or if I didn't, because I didn't have a permanent set of upper teeth when I interviewed. So I'm always like, did I have my teeth in when I interviewed? Anyway, so it's just all these kind of weird things that you don't think about. But I think as far as faculty go, I would like to see them share more about themselves and be more open to that sharing. It's really hard though, and I know that, and I own it because it's taken me to all this time to be here in this moment, and owning entirely authentically who I am and what I'm about. But the students I know respond to that because they come to me as a neutral party. And whereas like you as a professor, let's say, Dr. Robert, like they're afraid of you a little bit because like you're gonna grade them and stuff. So like they can't have these like intimate conversations about their very personal like issues or mental health or whatever. Like it's a lot for them to be able to have those conversations. So maybe starting at the very beginning of the semester and being like, I'm open, please, this will not affect your grade. I want to know what your needs are, and like let's have a conversation one-on-one. It doesn't have to be with everyone present and be a big, to do, but I think just showing a little bit of vulnerability and showing a little bit of interest and not taking a really hard line is gonna go a long way. And like these changes are incremental. Like I wanted to talk about that some in what I wrote, but these things, these shifts, they're small pivots along the way. And we'll get to yes eventually, but just to kind of take these small steps toward increasing accessibility for students, increasing your vulnerability. That's what I had to do. It took a lot of small kind of steps to get here. So I hope that helps.
I think the jury is out on this issue. I think some people find it helpful to disclose. Me personally, I don't mind people asking me about my disability because I feel like it clears the air. In terms of, I really truly do agree with what Cara said, though, in terms of creating an environment in the classroom that is welcoming for people to be able to disclose their struggles and their abilities and disabilities. There's also, though, an issue that can be problematic of people kind of oversharing or over disclosing, which also can make it difficult for everyone in the classroom. So as the teacher, you kind of have to creatively manage that. And in my own experience in the classroom, one of the things the students said, and I took it as a complete compliment, when I taught my class last spring, the students were like, I asked them point blank after a couple of classes, what are you getting out of the class? And a couple of people raised their hands and said, well, we're not used to all of this vulnerability from our professors. So, and that was just a way of me, and part of it is just that vulnerability is in my body. So when I'm teaching in the classroom, I'm walking all around, and in my own head, I see a normal person walking around. So when I see myself in the mirror, it's kind of shocking. It's like, wow, I really am disabled. So I took that as a compliment. And so it's just really tricky ground, but you just have to have the openness to treat one another as human beings as you would want to be treated. I think that use the golden rule.
Yeah, I think that I would add only to that I totally agree with everything Diana and Cara said. A couple of scenarios in the classroom. I always let students let me know what they want to about their accommodations or disabilities, etc. I never sort of call them out in class because it's their private thing. They can do what they want. And about disclosing a faculty member's disability, I think obviously it's everybody's choice. I think that whether or not you have a disability or not, if you're teaching disability related, something disability related in the classroom, we know that students who are underrepresented minorities feel more comfortable when they read more about when the curricula includes people like them. The same for people with disabilities. I can remember as a teaching assistant teaching a class, and no, actually that was later in my career, but I was teaching a class and I taught disability and literature for one of the units. And it so happened I had two obviously physically disabled students in the classroom. And so I was worried that either they would feel weird or people would be looking to them for the answers, but I needed to worry. It was totally fine. Nothing like that happened. And then I had a student, a graduate student last summer who was 1 year away from graduating from BU with his master's. And he said that it was the first time in the classroom he had felt like he belonged in the academy as a student with disability. And he put that down to the fact that I had disability readings by and about people with disability in the curricula. So there are all different ways to welcome students, whether you disclose or not, whether students disclose to you. It just putting that in the curricula says volumes about who you are.
Thank you very much for your presentations today. It has been a great blessing, and it has been illuminating. I have so many notes here about your journeys, and they're truly inspiring. So I just want to thank you for your time. Thank you for who you are. And thank you for educating us about your journey and inspiring us. I'm also grateful to the people who join us today for this panel presentation and for your valuable questions and comments. Before we go, however, there was a comment in the chat by Rumni, and I think the comment captures a lot of what inspired this panel. Rumi points out, I'm an MDiv student, and I would really have appreciated having a presentation like this during my orientation to the School of Theology. So thank you, because your work of educating the community, your work of advocacy, certainly makes us a better people, more loving and more friendly. So thank you again. Have a great day, and I look forward to continue collaborating with you. Best.